Oh, I see the sign that says live on Facebook, and I'm looking on my phone to see if I'm there. And there's Marzi. Marzi's on also. I see the sign that says live. Oh, good, 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 good. Okay, hi everyone. It's Tuesday afternoon, 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock in Italy, and 2 a.m. in Poland. My wife's in Poland and she's coordinating this. Thank you so much, honey, for staying up so late to do this. And hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Give me some thumbs up if you're out there so that I know that you're there. I mean, you know, I talk to myself enough and I would prefer not doing that today. Today's talk is called Interconnected, the healing promise of the microbiome for autoimmune disease. And we're having a guest here. I see in the chat that Dr. Pedram Shojai is here and Marzi's letting her in. Pedram, hey, my friend, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Unmuted now. Hello.
Hey, all right, all right. So let me introduce my good friend, Dr. Pedram Shojai. And one of the signatures that I think of when I talk about Pedram is that he's the guy that wrote in his book, the first recommendation in his book that I've quoted so many times, many of you have heard me say, and that is set your alarm on your watch for every hour. No matter what you're doing, when the alarm goes off, just pause and take 5 deep breaths. Just 5 deep breaths, and do it every hour for 1 day. And the impact factor of that in my life was huge. By the end of that day, I was so much more calmer. And so this is my good friend, Dr. Shojai, the urban monk. Pedram, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be here. Nice to see you as always.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And our talk today, the title of the talk is Interconnected, the healing promise of the microbiome for autoimmune diseases. So I want to start by just giving a bit of an overview. I mean, all of our attendees, you guys have heard me talk so much about the microbiome, and I just want to make sure that you're out there. Yeah, you are. I don't see any thumbs yet. Give me a thumbs up if you're out there so that I know that you're there. It makes me know that I'm not talking to myself, but I've got Pedram here now, so I'll talk to Pedram. But
what am I, chopped liver?
Well, I know you're not vegetarian, man. We've done many a meal together. So I know that. So I'd like to give you guys just a bit of an overview first. You've heard me say that if there is one area that we're going to focus on in life to be healthier, if there's only one area that you have to get the most bang for your buck, it's the microbiome. And you've heard me say the microbiome modulates, that's the big geek Scrabble word, modulates, which means it has its hands on the steering wheel of how every tissue of your body functions, every single tissue. And to give you an example, I just printed out some of the studies that I reference in my book, You Can Fix Your Brain. The first one, control of brain development, function, and behavior by the microbiome. It doesn't say influence of brain development, it says control of brain development. The next one, normal gut microbiota modulates, hands on the steering wheel, brain development and behavior. And now I'm going to do the David Letterman thing, right? And the next one, gut instincts, microbiota as a key regulator of brain development, aging, and neurodegeneration. And there are hundreds and hundreds of studies like that. The next one, the brain-gut axis dysfunctions and hypersensitivity to foods as a result in the idiopathogenesis, meaning the development of schizophrenia. It's the microbiome, which then has the poorly digested macromolecules that get through the intestinal permeability. The microbiome an abnormal microbiome will cause intestinal permeability. These big molecules get through into the bloodstream. Some of them can trigger in genetically sensitive people the development of schizophrenia. And there's paper after paper. This one's on depression and black moods. They call it black moods. This one is gut to brain dysbiosis and cognitive impairment, meaning losing the ability to think. You know, the papers go on and on and on. And I'm just going to give you the last two. I'm going to stop here and just give you the last two so I give Pedram a chance to say hello. But this is microbiome and colorectal carcinoma. This talks about how when people have colon cancer, there's a specific microbiome that they have consistently. And the next paper, microbiota-based model improves the sensitivity of fecal tests for detecting colonic lesions. When they look at the components of the microbiome, they have a 91.7% accuracy in saying this person's got colon cancer. By evaluating the microbiome, 91.7% accuracy. So this is like OMG again and again and again about the microbiome and how important it is. So for those of you that have heard me say before, how do you rebuild a microbiome? We'll do that in a little while. We'll talk about it some more. But that's why this topic is so important. So now let's talk about why Dr. Pedram Shojai is here today. So this is my friend who is I'm not sure the right word is master film producer, but he's produced a number of films, traveled the world, gone to Africa, way back in the jungles of Africa to shoot about, well, Pedram, I'll let you talk about it a little bit. Give us a little of your background first, and which led you up to why you're here today.
Sure. I was a Taoist monk, became a Taoist priest, was a senior student of a Kung Fu teacher while I was pre-med at UCLA. And then one world was filled with vitality and the other one was filled with morphine and really dismal results with chronic pain patients. And I just got to the point where I said, man, I can't do this. Went off and studied with the Dalai Lama and, went on lots of interesting walkabouts, came back, became a doctor of Oriental medicine and thought I was going to, fix people with traditional medicine. Those industries don't talk, right? So Western medical doctors, when I first came out, weren't talking to Eastern medical doctors. And so I decided to integrate and do a big integrative medical model clinic. And so we're doing all this integrative stuff within a sick care model. And so the insurance companies only pay you when things are broken. And people, it was just ahead of its time in prevention and prediction. And I realized that everything we were talking about, the real answers were how can I best put myself out of business so these people don't need what the body shop has here. Like I need a driving school, not a body shop. And that's what got me into media, right? Started writing books, made 3 films now, this docuseries, started when I had hair, right? Like there's just, it's been a hell of a journey. And man, have I learned a lot on this journey, just trying to help people understand that there's no magic pill, there's no probiotic that fixes everything. It's about living probiotically. Right. There is a lifestyle. It's how you live your life, which determines all of this. And, but the answers are there. I mean, this stuff has just blown my mind open. And there's, we could geek out about it all you like, because that's what I've been doing for the last year.
Yes. Let me say hello. Lisa Kirby's here from Charlotte. Catherine from Paulsbo, Washington. Tracy says, you're so much cuter and smarter than David Letterman. Well, thank you, Tracy. That's really nice of you. Bridget from Brampton. Nancy Kobayashi's in Japan. Steph, hi, Steph, thank you. Tori's in Lexington. Tracy, I'll get to your question later about what's the paper on microbiome type and colon carcinoma. Maria in Naples, Cheryl's here, and the list goes on and on. Thank you all very much, folks, for being here. Pedram was one of my coaches, my primary coach in making Betrayal, that I called him a number of times and asked him, what do I do about this? And what do I do about that? And he was so supportive to Marzi and I as we were filming and putting it all together. He's a master at this. And tell us now about the project that you've just completed.
Whew, we just had the baby and we're about to parade it around, right? And
Yes.
it is 9 episodes about the microbiome. Man, do we get into it. I mean, the promise of this medicine is unbelievable. At first I was like, oh, this is cool. This is really interesting. I keep reading these papers that come up. People should know about this. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that the earth underneath my feet was no more. The foundations of medicine have fundamentally changed, and you cannot look at what we've been looking at the same way again, because we have to look through a different lens. It's look, there's these trillions of life forms that are basically a web of life that surround us and basically support us from the inside out and the outside in, and they're the communication web between us and the natural environment. And it's like, oh yeah, they were there, and they're germs, but they're not E. coli, so we won't bomb them, right? But it was a very kind of top-down militaristic attitude we had towards bacteria and microbes, tolerating them at best. Now we realize that the majority of our genetic information, the majority of our absorption, digestion, there's so much energy production, hormone conjugation. I mean, you name a human function, it's pretty much also being done by the microbiome, if not better. It's the missing organ, and it's the glue between all the other organs that's basically connecting and binding our health in a way that's either working or not working for us. And you start looking at interventions, I don't care what chronic disease you have. If you're not addressing the microbiome, you're missing a critical component to what's keeping you from getting well. And that, to me, has tremendous promise.
Yeah, I paused on all the studies I have, that there are a couple of studies that talk about the microbiome sets the environment in the development of autoimmune diseases. It doesn't matter which autoimmune disease, but the papers I was going to show you were on type 1 diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis. But this is true for any autoimmune disease. That, remember, we've talked before, there's a trilogy in the development of autoimmune diseases, and it's a genetic vulnerability, an environmental trigger, and intestinal permeability. And the permeability comes from the environment inside the gut, which is the microbiome. The microbiome controls all of that, has its hands on the steering wheel of the environment inside the gut and its impact. Remember, I've said before, for every one message from the brain going down to the gut, there's 9 messages from the gut going up to the brain. Pedram, can you tell us a little about that ratio and its impact on brain function from what you've learned in putting this together?
So you quoted something that came from Alessio Fasano, who's a genius in the field, who we interviewed for the series. Beautiful, delightful human being who's very gracious with his time. And there's another gentleman named Sarkis Mazminian, who runs the microbiology lab at Caltech, who did the work that I'm about to talk about, who's in the series. And they started looking at the interaction, the plumbing, if you will, between the brain and the gut, something called the vagus nerve that drops down. It's a cranial nerve, goes down, innervates all of the viscera, all of the internal organs, for the most part, in the digestive tract. And so they started looking at the relationship between these neurodegenerative conditions and the bacteria that are found in the gut. And there was a strong indication that there was something going on here. And as they started digging deeper, they've gotten to the point, when you talk about like the prodromal period a lot, Doc, they got to the point where, I mean, you can take a look at what bugs you have in your gut right now and reasonably predict that within 15, 20 years, you're going to have Parkinson's, dementia, or Alzheimer's, because they just work their way up their the nerve tract of the vagus nerve and go into the brain. I mean, there's just bugs crawling up to your brain, and either you have the right balance and the right bacteria that are producing, neurotransmitters and things that are actually helping you be happy and conscious and cognizant, or you're heading south and your gut is actually making you forgetful, and it's actually, a pathway directly up to the brain. Predictable. We know this is true. There are all sorts of procedures, all sorts of things. There's a lot of promising science that's coming from this on the treatment side. But what we know today is probably what grandma told you in the first place, which is don't eat that junk food and have good microbial balance and, eat ferments and all these things. So, the science is really promising. And a lot of people are like, well, we can't say anything yet. That's absolutely untrue. We know that people feel better by fixing their gut. And we know that we can shift the balance of microbes and move away from this prodromal period and really arrest the development of a lot of these conditions. So, man, this is revolutionary stuff.
Amen to that. Amen to that. I'm going to say hello to Dominic in New York, Jillian in Ohio, Manuela in Sydney, Australia, Elizabeth in Florida, brr, she says. Sabrina Cadini's in the house. Tracy says the microbiome's the boss. Yes, absolutely. And it goes on and on. Thank you, folks, for your comments. Please throw questions in here for Dr. Pedram and I, and we'll be happy to address them. I read those papers that you were referring to from Caltech in 2010, and it dropped my jaw because the title of one of the papers was Pre-Symptomatic Parkinson's in the title. Wait a minute. What is pre-symptomatic Parkinson's? No one had ever said that before, because Parkinson's is when you don't have control over your muscles anymore. And you read the paper and they were talking about how the misfolding of these proteins occurs in the gut. It's the microbiome that twists up these proteins and they become misfolded is the term. They then go right through the walls of the gut into the inside tissue, into the nerves of the gut called the enteric nerves. They don't go through permeability. These misfolded proteins go right through the walls of the gut into the enteric nerves, and they creep neuron by neuron up the nerves back to the vagus nerve in the spine. Now that really caught me. Why do they go neuron by neuron and don't go off to the side? And the researchers were very clear. These misfolded proteins aren't scattered along the side of the road at all. They stay in the nerve, neuron by neuron, all the way up the spine. And they have a magnetic pull to the area of the brain called the substantia nigra. And that's where the inflammation occurs, killing off those brain cells. And eventually you get Parkinson's. So and that's why almost every Parkinson's patient has constipation 20 years before they've got Parkinson's, and they're always battling constipation. And as Dr. Shojai is telling us, you can identify this. They now know what the microbiome looks like for these people. And you can predict, if you don't change this microbiome, you got a problem coming down the road.
Mm-hmm. You'll see this in autistic children too. It's like, why do they all have constipation and stomach issues? I mean, you start to cross over multiple areas, multiple, generations and diagnoses. And all of a sudden, man, it all just goes back to the gut. But specifically, what's happening in the gut, right? And there's this life soup that has been going on that, people have been looking at for 10, 15, 20 years now. But now as all the science is coming in from all these different directions, everyone's just going, oh my goodness, we had no idea how little we understood.
Back in the 1980s, we were recommending Lactobacillus acidophilus or bifidobacteria. And we thought we were just cutting edge, and we were back then. And just shotgunning in some probiotics. Now we know the goal. Well, Dr. Shojai, I'm going to ask you, what's the conclusion that comes out of Interconnected in terms of using the supplements of probiotics? What's the takeaway?
So it's a bit complicated because probiotics there's a tremendous amount of promise with probiotics, but as often happens, so you have the guys in the ivory tower that are like, okay, now hold on, we can't make any conclusions from anything until there's an overwhelming amount of evidence. And that takes, 20 years to, prove anything. They kind of remind me of the Ents from Lord of the Rings, where it takes them forever to argue about a single thing until they could all agree that there's a preponderance of evidence. Then you have the people that own supplement companies that are like wild, wild west, making claims that are completely unsubstantiated, trying to sell, potions and lotions to people on the other side of the spectrum. And then in the middle, you have humanity, reality, right? And you have the functional medicine docs that have been at this for a long time and watching the clinical results. And you can't tell any functional medicine doc that's been out there for more than 5 years that probiotics don't work, because they've seen lives change, right? But it's not a one-stop shop. It's not a one pill for an ill model. There's all kinds of different probiotics. We're understanding different strains. We're understanding soil strains. And really, I mean, the question is, who's this person standing in front of me, right? So I've become a big advocate of this thing called testing, right? So you do some of this gut microbiome testing, figure out what the problem is. You know, for me, I did it and I don't have any oxalate bacteria, you know, so I was eating all these spinach salads. I can't break down spinach, right?
Yes.
And
So what's the impact if you don't have enough of the oxalic bacteria? What's the impact?
So you're feeding the oxalic bacteria are there to break down that component of spinach that then gives you, you know, the bugs poop, and then the bugs poop becomes food for the next round of bugs, which will actually help you break this down and assimilate it and turn it into the nutrients that you need. But if you don't have the bugs on the front end, you're taking a bunch of things that your body can't break down. It creates more inflammation. It creates indigestion. It creates all sorts of problems, right?
What is the accumulation of oxalic acid? Stones.
That's it.
Kidney stones.
That's it. And achy joints.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're eating spinach because spinach is good for you, but you don't have the bacteria to digest the spinach, so it becomes bad for you. This is like, wait a minute. What did you just say?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because if you read like Shape magazine and, you know, you're getting like the recommendations du jour, you know, it's just a bunch of people throwing stuff out there that's completely untethered from your individual reality. And so really what the promise of this is the personalized medicine that's coming through this, and your ability to really understand what's up with you and what foods sit well with you. I mean, look, I'm from the Middle East. You're not. You know, we have different genetic disposition as well, right? I don't know where you're at right now, but I'm standing in Southern California, right? And so, you know, there's a climate here. There's a seasonal food thing happening everywhere you are. And the bacteria, based on where you're sitting in climate and time of year and season, will also shift with the foods that are in season and the preponderance of, say, root vegetables now versus, you know, different kinds of foods later. And, you know, it's just all of this comes into the math that you have to factor into what it is that you eat. So anyone who's like, oh, here's your diet is just, you know, that's so 10 years ago, right? Like everything's changed.
Absolutely. You know, there's one paper, I love this, and I don't have it, I didn't think to print it out, but on the front page of the paper with the title, there is the drawing of a silhouette, and it's a cowboy on a horse carrying a Christmas tree. And then next to him is a man working in an office at a desk. And they're talking about the different microbiomes of these two men. Because one's out in the environment, dealing with nature, got a horse there, carrying a tree, you know, riding out out in the country. The other one's sitting in a sterile room with forced air conditioning, where the paint is completely different. Completely different. So hello, Sabrina. Sabrina Cadini says, if only I knew all these things before my mother was diagnosed with depression and then with Parkinson years ago. We could have probably saved her progression. Probably true, Sabrina. And I would say to you and to other people in the same shoes as Sabrina with your family, you need to check yourself. You need to check your microbiome. By the way, Marzi has posted the link here for everyone to click on the link at the end of the show. Don't leave us now, but come back and click on the link to register to watch Pedram's 9-part series. It's free. And she'll put the link in here a couple of times so that while you'll find it easy enough to watch the series. I'm so excited. Tell us some of the people besides Dr. Fasano that you put on here that you've interviewed.
I actually just loaded this page. You know, the series, I have a countdown timer. In an hour and a half, this thing goes live. I mean, after all these months, this thing is actually going live in an hour and a half. Here, I'll look at the list. We've alphabetized. So I got a lot of AI people who are looking at big data to do this. I got Dave Asprey.
AI. What's AI?
Artificial intelligence is a big part of this because there is so much information coming through these trillions of bits of information. When you look at genetic information that comes from trillions of bacteria with all the nucleotides and all the things that they code for, there's no one that could do that math on their own. And so we've brought in big computers, big data computing to really start crunching some of this. And it's this kind of convergence of our ability to look at this, sequence DNA and RNA, and also have big enough computers to start to read the tea leaves and kind of make sense of some of these patterns that have now brought a lot of promise. Because when you start looking at metabolic pathways of certain types of bacteria, then you understand, like, in relation to other bacteria, what's happening. And again, there's just a lot of math, a lot of science that goes into this. And one of the gentlemen in this is one of the founding fathers of this, named Marty Blazer, who basically his work was about going to these remote tribes and looking at what they had going on. So, they'll drop into some tribe and like steal someone's poop and be like, hey, I just want to see what's going on here.
Can you imagine a tribesman in
freaked
some
out, man.
some guy that's taking your poop and wants to look at your poop?
Like, what is wrong with this guy, right? Like, why are these people so strange? And so they start analyzing this poop and they're like, wow, the diversity. So they start looking at this saying, wow, we've lost so much biological genetic diversity in the microbes in our gut. And so, you got the cowboy who's somewhere between the tribe guy and, the cubicle guy who's probably doing a little better. And then you got the guy in the cubicle who's huffing paint and, breathing carpet fumes and all the things that we subject ourselves to that are antibiotic, right? So we're talking about life. We're talking about microbial life. And a lot of these things kill that life. Right. And so then the theory was, okay, with the loss of diversity, we're having, kind of increased onset of some of these chronic diseases. And there's a strong amount of evidence to suggest that that's the case. So then the answer is, okay, great. Why don't I go get the poop of, the tribal person, do a fecal transplant, and basically, take their poop and make it my own, basically, which is a procedure that works. And then all my diseases go away. Here's the problem. If you're not eating what the tribal guy ate, those bacteria die within a day and you're right back to square one. So you can't take healthy microbiome and feed it Twinkies and expect it to act the way it's supposed to. It needs to have insoluble fiber. It needs to have, polyphenols and all the things that come with eating a plant-rich diet. And so you have to quack like a duck, right? You have to eat the same way to support the microbiome that is the healthiest we know, right? Which is a diverse microbiome that gives us tolerance and all sorts of wonderful things that we could talk about.
Unless you want a Twinkie microbiome. If you want a Twinkie microbiome, eat Twinkies.
Yeah, or just go visit any hospital in America.
That's right. And the result would be 91% accuracy doing an evaluation of your microbiome to saying this person's got colon cancer. And they find it 91% of the time by evaluating the microbiome. What you eat feeds the bacteria that grows. You eat crap, you get crap results. We can't say it any clearer than that. That's why it's so important to eat the prebiotics, the root vegetables, the berries loaded with polyphenols, the fermented vegetables. Let's talk for a minute about some of the experts that you interviewed about fermented vegetables.
So before there was this thing called refrigeration, food would spoil, right? And so we, by hook or by crook, found ways to preserve food by this thing called fermentation. And, so you find a little kefir grain inside, the yogurt that you've been making, and all of a sudden they have kefir. And so people over time, every culture has ferments, because what happens is if you get the right types of bacteria to start to metabolize the food, they create an environment. Bacteria fight each other all the time. So even good bacteria, what they do is they create this thing called biofilm. And that biofilm acts as a deterrent or even an antibiotic for other types of bacteria. So the kind of bacteria that would come in and spoil and rot and destroy your milk is now being crowded out by these lactic acid producing ones that are making your yogurt, right? And that's why you can make yogurt and keep it longer. And so this was a big part of our diet. What else was a big part of our diet? Soil bacteria. You pick a carrot out of the ground, you dust it off and you eat it. You ride all day, you find a river, you stick your head in the water and you gulp down, water out of a river with, minerals and dust and whatever else is in there. So we had this constant influx of biological genetic information that's coming to us from our environment, telling our immune system, hey, this is what's going on, this is where we're at, this is what it's like over here. And it was like a sentinel, right? It was an ability for us to sense what's happening in our environment internally, and it's informing our immune system of like how to, what to prepare for, if you will, right? And so the ferments were a big part of how we co-evolved. And if you look at, say, cows, right? They're ruminant species. So you have all sorts of different mammals, and there's different ways, like you could, you basically break down your food on the front chamber or the mid chamber, back chamber, depending on what kind of mammal you are. We have the ability to break down food in multiple ways. But if you look at how we've evolved as a species, there is a certain subset of bacteria that is only fed by mother's milk so that it can live off these oligosaccharides so that it can thrive. And so when we're eating these plant fibers, it's actually, we're laying this food on a sacrificial altar in our gut for the bacteria that are there that then crowd out the bad bacteria, produce this thing called butyrate, which helps with our inflammatory cascades and all sorts of things. And then what that bacteria excretes then feeds the next level of bacteria, which then help us conjugate hormones and detox. I mean, there's just this elaborate system of tiered kind of like a pecking order of feeding these things that we've disrupted, because we went from 150 grams of fiber a day to 10 if we're lucky. And if we're eating Twinkies, we're like, completely in the other side of the fence, right? And so, I just went off because I'm so deep in this content right now. I mean, I've gone through every single script.
That's really great. And as you were saying this, I'm thinking, the scientists have known this for 10 years. They've been publishing it. So doctors who read the science, guys like me and some of the functional medicine people who read the science, when it first comes out, we know this. We talk to our patients about it. They talk to their general practitioner, who then goes to read some of the science. So they then know it. So eventually, this depth of understanding that Dr. Pedram just did is going to be common vernacular that people talk about at the dinner table when you're with your friends. And that's our goal, is to get these concepts that seem very sophisticated now, get them into your everyday jargon, your everyday language, because that's when that knowledge is deeply embedded in you, you then start thinking that way, and it guides your decisions about what you eat. That's why this 9-part series, Listening to the World Experts, is so important to see. And like my series, Betrayal, Marzi and I put together Betrayal, like our series, that I think everyone should watch Betrayal because it sets the platform for autoimmune diseases. Everyone needs to watch Interconnected because it sets the platform how to build a healthy gut, which has its hands on the steering wheel of everything you do, of everything in your body, your brain, your heart, your liver, your kidneys. Just go to Google and type in microbiome and heart function, microbiome and brain function, microbiome and kidney function. Here come the studies. It has its hands on the steering wheel of all of it.
It's funny is, you look at these immunology departments at major universities, most of them have transitioned to becoming microbiome study department, like floors are being dedicated to studying the microbiome, because you cannot understand immunology without understanding the microbiome at this point. Yeah. And here's the problem though, is like you and I can talk about this stuff. There's a number of functional medicine doctors that are, really up on this. And then I travel America, right? And I start talking to normal people at, airports. The challenge and the reason why I do what I do and spend a lot of time on the road capturing these interviews is, on average, it takes 17 years for the newest scientific research to get to your local doctor's office. So, I mean, let's just say 15 years for the even math. You have a 10-year-old daughter who's suffering right now. She's a full-grown adult dealing with infertility by the time her doctor is talking about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Really great example, really great example. That's why it's so important that all of us, the consumers, we learn how to protect ourselves and our families. And this is the type of production that's based on, let's talk about the reason that you've done this. Let's, where's the momentum coming from to do this?
I started kind of following the breadcrumbs, if you will. I can't say that around you. That's just like a taboo thing to say. Yeah, totally. The gluten-free breadcrumbs around Tom O'Brien. I started following breadcrumbs when I got into my first film. You know, it was about health and the broken medical system. And I'm like, man, this is terrible. This is a sick care model. Doctors only get paid when there's disease. There's no incentive to get people better. And then we started following the environmental toxins in my next movie and being like, oh my goodness, there's billions of tons of chemicals that are suffocating our cells and our mitochondria. And you know, we're smothering out life, self included, right? And so then I started kind of following, like, look, you know, if you buy this, then it's on you. So how do we do this economically and just, you know, use our money to support the good guys and companies that do it? All the while, I'm reading this research going, this is the most fascinating stuff I've ever heard. And so you turn on your TV, and what are they talking about is the pill for an ill model, right? The pharmaceuticals can afford to spend billions of dollars on advertising every single year because they live on, they basically created a plantation system, right? They farm chronic disease. You're not supposed to get better because you become a customer for life on many of these drugs. And they're blockbuster drugs, right? And that's why, is because people need you for life. It's a great product. You're a great customer. No one hears this stuff. No. And so, you know, that's it, man. It's just like, man, this is God's work. You know what I mean? Like, you got to get this information out to people because people are suffering and they're stuck in a trap.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sabrina says, I'm in Southern California too. Annie says, Aussie back in the house with a couple of hearts for us. Thank you, Annie. Kelsey says, hi, Tom. My son had the polio vaccines and DTaP vaccine at 2 months old. A few days after that, he started having seizure-like activity and developed infantile scoliosis. While I was pregnant with him, I had the MMR and Tdap vaccines. Is there anything I can do to help him with detoxing? The first step, Kelsey, the very first step is work the microbiome. Always. That's the first step. It's safe. It's easy. Learn about the diversity of foods, have his microbiome evaluated. Watch Interconnected, you'll get the big picture. There's a lot of things that can be done. We can't go into all that here, but finding a good functional medicine practitioner who is certified would be a good starting point, but certainly address the microbiome. Very safe to do, very safe, and will always help to build resilience and strength. Remember, it's the microbiome that modulates brain function, 9-to-1 ratio. So it's the microbiome, that's the first step. And the link is here for Interconnected. Click on that link at the end of this show so that you can go back and click on it, register, because it starts in an hour. It actually starts in an hour for the next 9 days. This guy he's now in labor. He's been getting pregnant with this for the last 9 months. He's now in labor. He's about to deliver in an hour, and he's here with us. So thanks.
I'm just doing my Lamaze breathing, man. You know, there's something that just came up with the last question that I do want to address, in that, you know, everyone wants to blame a single thing. It's like, oh, it's the vaccines that are at fault. Oh, it's the toxicity that's at fault. Now it's the microbiome that's at fault. And so what we need to do is look at this multifactorially and realize, and someone I interviewed for the series had a great example for this. It's like, if you think that fixing the microbiome is going to, like, a polluted lake and dropping in little, like, freshly hatched fish so that you can repopulate the fish, and you wonder why they keep dying, and you don't look upstream to the factory that's dumping lead or mercury or arsenic or whatever you want.
Really good analogy.
You're in trouble, right? Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, you got to look at the heavy metals. And, you know, it's a crazy story, Tom. Like, My director is in Fort Myers, Florida. And so as we finished this thing, I had to go to the studio and do, I don't know, 2, 3 days of just talking to, whatever. And so we get over there and I'm in this beautiful hotel overlooking this amazing lagoon. And it's stunning, right? And I just hear so much noise coming from downstairs. And I go, oh, it's all coming from the pool. Like there's 10 feet away from the pool, there's like this stunning, beautiful water that's like God's country, paradise. And everyone's dipping in a chlorinated pool, and I'm making a show about the microbiome, right? It's like, so, like, why are these people not in the natural body of water that have the viruses and the bacteria and the things that are in balance to help reinoculate us? And so I start digging in the story, and these guys are, oh no, you never go in that water. What's up? And they're like, well, the red tide. I go, oh, I remember reading about that. So upstream from all of these lagoons, a little further north in Florida, they're having these huge issues with the sugar refineries dumping all this like toxic sludge from their sugar manufacture into these lakes, where then this toxic bloom of algae is like overflowing and killing all life, and it's like overflowing down into these rivers and eventually into the ocean, to the point where people are like, they're riding a boat and there's flopping dead fish on either side of your boat, and when you pull up, there's dead turtles and dolphins on the beach.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happening inside of our bodies, but we just can't see it. And we're like, oh, I don't feel well.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's like just nature mirrors all of it.
Yeah. Tara says, my daughter struggles with eczema, so we did a stool sample test. Is that the best way to check your microbiome? She was high in Helicobacter pylori and a few others, so she is taking supplements because I wasn't comfortable with antibiotics to kill it. Well, Tara, there are some natural compounds that have been shown to be effective against Helicobacter pylori. It's called mastic gum. It's one of the reasons why Napoleon conquered some islands in the Mediterranean, was because that's where the mastic tree grows. And sometimes you see these portraits of Napoleon, he's holding his stomach, and he used to have a lot of abdominal pain, and he thought it was a Helicobacter infection, so he wanted mastic gum. It's kind of cool to know these little stories in the background. Turned out he was holding his stomach because they were poisoning him with arsenic, just a little bit every day in his food, and it accumulated, and it killed him, eventually killed him. But Helicobacter, there's a lot of strains of Helicobacter that have become drug resistant. And so using natural products won't get the job done, that the Helicobacter is getting stronger and stronger. And sometimes you just got to bring in the big guns. Sometimes you do. And then you have to rebuild the microbiome afterwards. If you need the drugs, you take them. Short term, you take them so that you can stop and in Dr. Pedram's example, the toxic sludge in the gut of this resistant Helicobacter pylori. Perhaps your daughter will respond to mastic gum or some homeopathy or something, perhaps, but if not, you get the big guns. You get that Helicobacter out of there. That's most important. Yep. Dr. Pedram, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of supplements out there, oregano oil, there's a lot of berberine alkaloids, there's a lot of things that are kind of full spectrum that'll wipe out bad bugs. Here's the problem, though. It's the same way we deal with kind of foreign policy and bad neighborhoods. Like you go in there and you kind of play whack-a-mole with bad guys instead of going in and building schools and putting in education, all that. So the one side of it is, here's this bad agent that we're, shaking a stick at. But the other side is, how can we surround it with good neighbors that will teach better behavior?
Absolutely.
And so inoculating with the right types of bacteria that then create kind of a web of life in a community that then start to kind of train and take over and kind of shift the classroom, right? You got a couple rowdy kids, you shift them around, you put them around with the good kids, all of a sudden the classroom becomes better. And we're finding that a lot of these models are being inspired by ecological models. So you actually look at like forestry models and some of the things that are kind of separate than medicine that are coming in, like the sciences of forestry. They're coming in and they're informing how to treat. And so now we're talking about gut forestry and putting in the right species that will help against the invasive ones, right? So you could either do weed killer all the time, or you put in plants that will crowd out the weeds.
Yep. Well said. And with Heliobacter, there are some labs that'll do a sensitivity profile to see what natural things might work. Masticum is the one that's most known, but there are other products that might work. That's one though, Heliobacter, you want to get it out of there and you want to rebuild a stronger microbiome. Heliobacter will trigger a number of different autoimmune diseases and atherosclerosis, hardening of your arteries, and Alzheimer's. When they do autopsy of the plaque in Alzheimer's, they often find antibodies to Heliobacter in the plaque. Cheryl O'Brien says the link, by clicking on it, won't take me to it. So, honey, please check the link and then post the answer here for that. And so, Cheryl, we're on it. We'll get back to you before the show's over. Carol Crandall says, should you mix up the various fermented products as opposed to depending on one? For example, kefir. And can one type then also cause imbalance? Dr. Pedram, what would you say to that?
I think like everything else, diversity is where you win, right? So if you're just having kefir every day, you're going to develop kind of a monotonous monocrop of the types of bacteria that live there. And again, if we look at Dr. Blazer's work, it's just about having variance of all things. And the more variety you have, the more resilience you have. And we use words like tolerance, right? And so you use that in autoimmunity all the time. It's the system has greater tolerance against all sorts of onslaught by having more variety. So, look, if you have kefir today, I would have sauerkraut tomorrow and kimchi the next day. And, just don't brush the dirt off your soil bacteria on your, turnips from the farmer's market, and just continue to bring different kinds of bacteria in. It's like anything else, right? It's as you kind of adapt and grow and you mix it up, you're going to have just more range. And I think that also applies to the supplements and the probiotic foods that you eat.
Leanne Scott in Australia says, honey, I think the links crashed. Thank you, Leanne. You can also join from Pedram's Facebook page. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So we'll work on it and we'll get that link back up if it's not working right now. But by the end of the show, we'll hopefully we'll have it done. If not, it'll be posted here for people later, or you can go to Dr. Pedram's Facebook page and register there.
We had the site crash for about 15 minutes today because there's just so many people that are interested in this subject matter. It's really striking a chord because, man, I mean, everyone's sick. And everyone's trying to figure out why. And this really is a big part of the missing ingredient. As you've been saying for years, I mean, the microbiome is really, it's like that invisible organ that has interconnected all of the other organ systems. Yeah. And we just, we didn't realize the extent to which this thing was influencing our health.
Right. George Burrows says, thanks, Dr. Pedram and Dr. Tom. Dr. George Goodhart would be proud. Thank you, George. That's really nice of you to say. He was one of my mentors, the founder of Applied Kinesiology. Ivory says, Dr. Ivory says, I signed up for Interconnected. Thank you for creating this wealth of information. I've not received the link as of yet. You will. There's lots of people registering. You'll get it.
Yeah, it's been a traffic jam. And the links are, here's who's going to receive the links. I decided to not have any bots involved in any of this part. When we get off is when I personally hit go, basically, break a bottle of champagne off the side of the boat and let this thing go. So I'm the one that's going to personally send the links this evening. Nice. I watched it last night. It's beautiful. It's really I'm proud of this.
That's real. Way to go, man. Way to go. I look forward to watching it myself. I've not seen it yet. Send me a link. I look forward to watching.
Your pretty face is all over it.
Well, happy to be a part of it. Emery says, inspiring the ecosystem approach, systemic approach to heal our human ecosystem, just like we would a river take out poison disruptors and introduce diversity to correct the balance. Exactly right.
Amen.
That's a really great analogy.
That's it. You know what's interesting about this too, Doc, is I got to say this because it's something that has really, you go into a lot of medical fields and, it's just kind of like the same old good old boys club. I'm happy to report that some of the lead thinkers and like top people getting all these NIH grants and are like really kind of driving this. There's a lot of women. driving the microbiome field, like the ones that are the lab directors, like the big bosses, and they have this kind of multi-dimensional thinking that's ecological, and it's brought a lot to the table. It's really shifting this kind of man-oriented balance in medicine, and it was really a privilege to sit with some of these genius female doctors and scientists that are at the top of their game here. It was really nice.
As you're saying this, I'm embarrassed that I didn't think to make the recommendation to you for Dr. Amy Prohl. She is one of those brilliant leaders in the field that's writing newsletters about this, has been for years, and publishing articles. So for all of you out there, Dr. Amy Prohl, P-R-O-A-L, she's got great newsletters she sends out about the microbiome and its impact on the development of autoimmune diseases. So that's another source that we all have. Just marvelous. So many hundreds and hundreds of hearts and thumbs up, and all those things are coming. Elizabeth says, betrayal filled my first notebook, but I have plenty more, plenty notebooks, such good information. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, you're about to fill another one. That's really great.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Pedram, do you happen to mention hidradenitis suppurativa as an autoimmune disease?
Not specifically. I mean, I have to say that, we get a lot of this in our customer service the last few days. Like, are you talking about this? Are you talking about this? Let me swim upstream a little bit and say that what we're talking about is the origins of pretty much every autoimmune disease.
Yep.
And if you swim upstream, I don't care what those words are, right? And that's a big part of what is shifting in the paradigm of medicine. Is we're getting really good at saying, oh, well, your palms are sweating, or whatever it is that's going on, and we're going to come up with a fancy word for it. But why? What is the root cause? What do we need to do to figure out what's happening at the intestinal barrier? What do we need to do to figure out why your immune system is overreacting and having modulation issues? And how do we set up the right mediators, the intermediators, if you will, between you and the natural environment to create a little bit of cushion and lengthen that fuse, right? And that's where we're seeing some amazing results.
Here's a great question on that line from Mia Jones. I've never heard you mention tonsils. How do you naturally help a possible tonsil abscess? My daughter constantly having a problem with one side, GP talking about removing it. So with that question, do you also include in the 9-part series about the oral microbiome?
We do. Well, my wife's a dentist, and I followed through to one of these genius dentists who's doing some amazing preventative work there. And then I also spoke with, brought in a pediatrician because it's just such a big deal. I mean, think about it. And Zach Bush, one of the docs in there, said a quote. So I had, we had a kid staying with us, a family friend, not family friend, my wife's cousin, staying with us for a couple of weeks. And he was there when I was screening. So he's the first non-team person that's seen this film. And, they're talking about how, when you're born via C-section, right? Not only are you not getting inoculated by mom's microbiome, you're getting put on some hospital table where you're getting, basic hospital bacteria that end up becoming strep infections and seeding the ear infections that you're going to get that get you onto the amoxicillin and all these cycles of antibiotics into your childhood. And then you fast forward a few years and you got to get your tonsils out. And this kid's just sitting there like shaking. He's a 15-year-old kid. He's like, oh my God, that is exactly my life, right? Yeah. And it's not uncommon. So the answer is, to me, I mean, listen, sometimes you're too far gone and there's things that need to be done. But the answer always is, why is the immune system so pissed off? What do you have to do to calm that fire and start to modulate and bring in the cellular mediators to start to shift that balance so that you're not constantly, at war with yourself or the bacteria in your body? Some of it'll come from gums. These are parts that we didn't realize. Is like people talk about the leaky gut, leaky gums.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Leaky teeth. Turns out you have direct access to, so one of the dentists we talked to, you could go, if you have abscesses in your teeth, the dentist is like, oh, that's a cavity, let's get it out. But if you have staining, that's still bacteria poop. And so these teeth are like dumpsters that are just overflowing with rot all the time. So what do you do to go in there and adjust for that? Because those bacteria are actually getting mainlined straight to your bloodstream. And so what a lot of people are suggesting now is that everyone is dealing with some sort of low-level sepsis, right? Like basically bacterial infection of the blood level because of oral hygiene, right? And it's blowing open the door on functional dentistry.
Yeah. Why is it that dentists give antibiotics? Why is it? There's only one reason. Because when they're working in your mouth and they squirt water in there and you lean over to spit it out in the porcelain tub and the water's red, it's got some blood in it, you've got leaky gums. They just gave you leaky gums to do the work that they had to do, whatever that work is. You got leaky gums. When you have leaky gums, the bacteria in your mouth, the staph and the strep bacteria, can get right in directly into the bloodstream. Your immune system says, whoa, what's this? You start making antibodies to staph and strep, and because of molecular mimicry, many of you have heard me talk about that before, if you've got antibodies being made to staph or strep, then it's possible, if you carry the gene of vulnerability, those antibodies start to attack the valves of your heart. You get rheumatic fever. It can kill you. That's the only reason. Is they give you antibiotics so that staph and strep get into your bloodstream from leaky gums. Your immune system doesn't have to take care of it because there's antibiotics that'll knock it out right away. So you don't make the antibodies to fight that bacteria, and there's no chance of the molecular mimicry attacking your heart. So
Gingivalis bacteria in the gums, direct tie to pancreatic cancer now. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable. I was sitting with a periodontist talking about this. It's unbelievable what we know about oral health that most dentists won't even talk about because they're too busy just like, filling and replacing. Your average tooth needs to get redone every 3.5 to 4 years. What does that mean? Does that mean you have terrible oral hygiene, or does that mean they didn't get all the bacteria out? And what does that mean about how to sanitize this environment so that you're constantly not feeding bacteria down into your gut and into your blood?
One of the things that I love to do is every once in a while, maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks, I eat an umeboshi plum. You buy them in the health food store, the pits in the middle of it, you put it in, you just put it out, ooh, man, whoa, that's sour, right? And I've developed the taste for it. I like it. And then I leave the pit in my mouth for a half hour or so and just let it sit around in there. And a little bit of juice comes out every once in a while. But it's a prebiotic that feeds the probiotics in your mouth so that you develop a healthier oral microbiome. And that'll be a discussion in the next year or two that you're going to hear a lot more about, is working on the oral microbiome along with the intestinal microbiome. Really critical components. So Mia, for you, one of the questions that I would ask is, does your child get nasal congestion a lot? A lot. Or history of recurrent ear infections, or they sneeze, and if they have that, they've got mucus up in their sinus cavities. It's draining down. So what's mucus in your sinuses? It's a human petri dish, and bacteria love your sinuses because you get mucus up in there. There's no blood that gets into the mucus, so there's no white blood cells to protect you. And so it's a feeding ground for bacteria, and you get more and more bacteria runs down the back of your throat, and your tonsils, there to protect you. They say, whoa, look at all the traffic on this highway coming down here past us. And your tonsils then try to get activated to fight this stuff. So diet and digestive function in terms of the foods that your child is eating, or do they have a dairy sensitivity or a wheat sensitivity that's producing mucus? There's so many things that might be, but that's just a couple of pearls that might help a little bit. Dr. Pedram, anything you'd like to say to that one?
Yeah, look, there's also, we're getting out of this era of non-targeted antibiotic therapy. In the old days, it's like, the kid's got an ear infection. Here's 10 days of amoxicillin. Let's just napalm everything and hope it goes away. And so we've done more damage, collateral damage than was worth it. So right now, they're in the postbiotic reality as we're studying this is like, okay, so there's a particular example of vaginal bacteria that's supposed to be there. And this vaginal bacteria has a biofilm it excretes that kills out and crowds out other pathogenic bacteria that would get in the vaginal canal. So now they're isolating this bacteria so that they can get this biofilm against vaginal tract infections, right? And so we're going to start having very targeted probiotics that crowd out with their biofilm the strep and the things that are getting into the plumbing up here, instead of saying, oh man, I tried to hold out, but I messed up. The kid's got an ear infection. Let's bomb it. So, garlic ear oil, there's a lot of things that can happen there. I grew up in a traditional culture where, we would, my mom would steam eucalyptus leaves and we would just throw a towel over our head and just let that just boom, it would just drain it out. Because antibiotic, antiviral, right? And then how do you reinoculate? Starts with your food, right? And again, if you're eating dairy and you're phlegmatic, I mean, come on, that's the first place to start.
Yeah. Leanne Scott from Australia says, Pedram, what do you think about our microbiome being part of a larger superorganism? Is this why what we're doing to our environment is so important?
You know what? As much as I want to say that sounds like science fiction, we're starting to learn now that the redwood trees in Northern California are one superorganism. We're starting to learn that the aspen trees are one superorganism. And I think that this entire biosphere has a web of communication through some language of life. And we have it through the water and through soluble, molecules inside of our bodies. Absolutely. But we have sensitivities to understand what's happening with the bacteria and the life outside of us that we're just starting to understand. So I think that we're going to, it's almost running into like Gaia theory at this point. We're running into this place where like our spirituality and our science are coming together, where we realize that this is one living, breathing planet. And for us to see ourselves apart from it is really folly. It's insane.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Taro Keith says, I put clove essential oil on my floss to help with bacteria in the mouth. That's
Great.
The right way of thinking. That's a really good way of thinking.
Great.
My honey says, what kind of plum is that? Umeboshi, Umeboshi. Umeboshi. Karen Crandall asks, what about oil pulling? Did you speak to any experts about oil pulling?
I didn't, because there's just so much you can talk about. I can tell you that what some of the experts that I thought were, doing some of the best clinical work we're doing was taking some of the botanicals and the essential oils that we know are really good for oral health and suggesting doing there's this thing called a water pick now, which is basically like a kind of a forced water toothpick. And so you put some of that in there and you go into the gums, because one of the biggest challenges we have with oral health is biofilm. So you talk to any periodontist, and they got to get in there and they got to mechanically scrape this stuff out, right? Because if you wait a day, it calcifies, it starts to harden, and then you got to break it up, and it's really hard to do so. That's why when you go into, a dentist's office, the hygienist is like, doing that thing, is because it hardens like kind of old dry yogurt. And so there's a lot of ways to go about it. I think oil pulling has some merit. And I think that, like anything else, it became very popular. And I don't know if it has as much value as been kind of put on it by the hype. But I haven't heard anyone die from it either. So, that's.
I've got a water pick, and sometimes what I'll do, it's the kind you put water in, and and the motor goes and it pumps the water in. And so I'll put tea tree oil in it, and I'll use tea tree oil as the antibacterial sometimes, and I'll go in there and do it with it. Mia Jones says, yes, my daughter's 24 and she has nasal problems. So that's the tonsils, the gal with the tonsils. She's got nasal problems. Well, the immortal words of Rosanna Dana, you think? You got all that mucus up there and it's going to drain down, and your tonsils are there to try to protect you, keep bad bacteria from getting down into your digestive tract. It's a first line of defense. So Mia, you've got a pathway for your daughter that you want to talk to her about. Let's see. Catherine says, I had a strep infection in my knee at age 2. Okay. Our link is posted once again. Marzi says, don't forget to register for Interconnected, everyone. Everyone that's here, please register. And if you can't watch all 9 episodes, you'll start. And then you'll say, wow, this is too good. And I want to watch it. I don't have time right now. All right, how do I get it? And then you'll order the darn thing. And then you'll have it and you'll share it with your family. I mean, it's free to watch now. It starts as soon as he gets off of this call. And my honey just sent me the hook. She said, wrap it up. So, you know, there's one thing in life I've learned, that's yes, dear. So
listen, honey. Yep.
With that, I'm going to say, Dr. Pedram Shojai, thank you so much for taking the time just before just birthing this event that's about, you're about to deliver your baby any moment. And we're so happy to be part of this with you. Thank you so much.
It's an honor always to be here with you. And, you know, I love the work that you're doing. And I got to say, look, I saw you on the thing last night. It's not only are you a star in it, it's like you have a way of speaking that really is relatable. And so, you know, keep up the good work, man.
Thanks
really,
so much, my friend.
great stuff.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.